Perfect. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. I know there's going to be people that continue to trickle in as we move on, but welcome to, I don't even remember what number road to residency this is, 3-ish, but welcome to the next road to residency. I'm Ashlee Bolger. For those of you who don't know me, I am a pediatric physiatrist in Cincinnati, and am moderating this year's series. So today we're going to talk about personal statements, meaningful experiences, and program signals. So really anything ERAS related is fair game. And I'm going to try to keep us on time. So please feel free to use the chat. I will be moderating that. We had some pre-submitted questions, some questions I have used from previous years that have got a lot of traction. But if you have something that you really want to know, please put it in the chat if you did not already submit it. And we'll try to get through as many as we can. But let's start with some introductions. So she needs no introduction, but Amy from AAP is the reason this happens all the time. We would not be here without her. So thank you, Amy. And then I'll just kind of go through the order that's on my screen for our panelists. And then you can just introduce yourselves and give like a one-liner on where you're from. So Dianna, you're first.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dianna, PGY1 at UTHealth Houston.
Awesome. And Alyssa, you're next.
Hey, my name is Alyssa. I am a PGY3 at Mayo Clinic in Minnesota.
Awesome. And then Dr. Romanoski is next.
Hey, everybody. Natasha Romanoski, Program Director at Penn State Health in Hershey, Pennsylvania. Look forward to chatting with you all tonight.
And then we have Drew.
Hi, everyone. My name is Drew Redepenning. I'm a PGY2 at University of Pittsburgh Medical Center in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
And then Dr. Friedlander.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tracy Friedlander. I am the Residency Program Director at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore.
And then Dr. Tonkin.
Hey there, everybody. I'm Brian Tonkin, PD at the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis.
And last, I think, but certainly not least, Dr. Choudry. You just happen to be at the bottom.
Hey, everyone. I'm Harris Choudry. I'm the Residency Program Director at Burke Rehab and the President of the New York Society of PM&R now. So excited for that.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you guys all for joining us. Again, we'll get started. We'll just kind of I'll start moderating and asking questions, and then panelists, if you feel like you have something to add, just unmute and drop in. And certainly students, if you have questions, put them in the chat and we'll just kind of get rolling. So the first kind of third, we're going to try to focus a little bit more on personal statements. I'm going to try to divide it into buckets. So questions at the beginning are going to stem mostly around personal statements, but first general question, what are you guys looking for in a personal statement? For those of you who either are PDs or maybe have interviewed and read applications.
Yeah, I think for myself, like giving context to your application, whether it's in the positive or the negative, if there's something that needs some explanation or elaboration, that's very helpful to see on a personal statement.
I would add that I think it's you only have a couple places where you can truly put in some free text and talk about yourself a little bit. So the experiences and then the personal statements where you get to really kind of shine about yourself and really demonstrate kind of the why PM&R and maybe some of the other things. But I think a lot of stuff is outside of your control, maybe like the letters and the dean's letter and your transcript was in your control, but so stuff like that, I think. So that's an opportunity for you to show yourself.
Yeah, and just share information that you want people to know, things that are things that make you uniquely you, that you want to share, go for it. I think if you enjoy writing, get creative. If you don't enjoy writing, that's also okay. Find someone to help you identify how to tell your story. And I think to Dr. Choudry's point, that's really important in regards to, are there things that are missing or that you wanted to just explain a little bit more? here's your opportunity, because you don't want someone looking through your application and kind of wondering, gosh, what about this part that doesn't make sense? Make it make sense. Use your personal statement as that opportunity.
Yeah, as far as like other stuff that not necessarily looking for in everyone, but it can be helpful is giving further insight into your, I guess, desire to go into the field of PM&R, what the motivation is. If, you know, there's like extenuating circumstances throughout your training or things like that, that's helpful to know about as well.
So I might elaborate on or ask a follow-up question to some stuff that you guys have all sort of skirted around. But one of the questions that was submitted was, should any special circumstances, i.e. leave of absence, be addressed, and to what extent if related to personal health issues? We've been told that anything mentioned in the application is fair game for questions and interviews. So are there better ways of addressing it, or how would you recommend doing that?
Yeah, so I had an applicant ask me this last week. It might be the same person that submitted this, but they were rotating with us, and they dropped out of another residency because they got in like an accident, and then they decided to pursue rehab it during their rehab. And when they came and rotated with us, every time they were meeting a resident or attending, they always kind of like talked around that. And I said, just be upfront, just tell me, like just put it right there at the top of your personal statement. I'd rather you explain it rather than talk around it. That's more for myself. Other people might feel differently, but I think the personal statement, if you can just put it out there and, you know, address it in the way you want to address it, is pretty helpful.
I would agree with that. I think that when we're putting together timelines, you know, it'll be pretty easy to pick up, you know, that there was a gap somewhere. Here's your medical school graduation year, and now you're applying this ARIS year, you know, several years later. So I think it would be helpful to explain it. And I think, you know, I think no matter the circumstances, we've seen, you know, medical students who have extended their medical school for various reasons. Either they pursued an MBA, you know, or an MPH or something that extended their medical school, or there was you know, a tough situation personally or whatever, you know. So I think it's better to address it than not, because I think the timeline is going to kind of show. And as you're interviewing, that's probably going to come up anyway, you know. And so I think addressing it in the personal statement can kind of let you control what's said about it, and then follow up in the interview when you get that chance.
You can ask also for them to comment on it in the dean's letter if you're interested in like that being something that's focused on, because that's another document that we tend to look at a little bit more comprehensively. And so if there is a gap, or there is a, you know, medical issue that sort of impacted your timeline, or it just impacted your experience, to have someone else within your school sort of highlight that, because we also are reading a lot of information, and sometimes, you know, may miss something, or we're reading quickly and like gloss over something that is important like that. So, you know, if it's in more than one place, it wouldn't necessarily hurt.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add to that too, and we didn't have a specific section to kind of elicit questions for this, but remember, you also have that impactful experience, or I can't remember exactly the verbiage, where you get a little paragraph to kind of write about something that was impactful or difficult, or, you know, something within your application. And so that can also be a place. I don't think there's a right or a wrong place to put it in the application, but I agree with everybody else. I think you know, that's who you are. And I've advised a handful of students over the years that have had something medical go on, and maybe it didn't significantly impact, you know, their medical school on paper. Like, you know, they can't, I mean, you don't have to divulge it, but I sometimes I think, you know, if it is something that could impact residency training, don't you want to go to a place that wants you there, just, you know, even with that, and like would be willing to accommodate and can accommodate? Because I think that's really, I mean, I don't know, that's sort of how I've always viewed it. And it's a slippery slope, and there's no right or wrong answer, and everybody's going to have, you know, a slightly different viewpoint, but that's sort of how I've always looked at it. So. Okay. So I have, the question is, are there any common things students do wrong when writing a personal statement? This might be very individualized. I think some of us have things that, we don't love, but are there any big things that when you're advising your students, you tell them, don't do this, or maybe shy away from this? Or even maybe the residents, did you get told anything by advisors when you were doing this, like stuff not to do?
So this is personal to me. It doesn't apply to everyone, but I've been seeing it a lot in emails, some personal statements. Like it's clear when like there's a lot of AI used to at least write it or start it. It's fine to get things jogging and like started, but edit it, make it seem more human would be a nice thing when you're reading 100 statements.
I guess something I heard during conferences is there's a lot of ACL stories.
I've always heard, yeah, don't bring up like a musculoskeletal injury. Again, I think that's personalized. And another one is like the word passion. I feel like every personal statement I've ever read has used the word passion a bunch. I also think that's a personalized thing though, that I have a gripe against. So.
I would say make sure that you have people review it, right? People that your advisor, maybe if you've gotten to know some of the residents at a program at your school or at a place you're rotating, just have them take a look at it. Bad grammar. My sister's a high school English teacher, and I still run everything that I write past her just for a double check. So, the easy stuff shouldn't be missed. And then I think again, probably personalized. It's you get the personal statement to express your how you got interested in PM&R, your attraction to it, why you're going into it, stuff like that. But it is a lot of, there are some common themes that I start to recognize. It was a personal musculoskeletal injury, or there was a a tough neurological something with a family member or something. So I think that's a double-edged sword, because it's not to minimize what experiences you've been through to bring you to the field, but it also is commonly found in a lot of personal statements. So I still think you want to spend some time setting yourself apart and trying to talk about your personal interests. So.
And I think for practical advice, trying to keep it a page or less is typically very appreciated to the reader. It can be very difficult as we're, again, scrolling through just hundreds and sometimes thousands of papers, and then you get like right to the end and then there's one more sentence. So just be mindful of your organization when you're writing your personal statement. And then just remember, yes, this helps you in your application to receive an interview, but after the interview, a lot of your interviewers are going to reference that and maybe ask you questions about it. So make sure it's something that you are willing and comfortable to continue to talk about throughout the interview season.
And then I would just add, like, you want to make it your voice, but I think this goes to Brion's comment on have somebody else read it, because I think sometimes people get a little too creative, and I'm peds rehab, so I like creativity, but you never want yours to stand out that much. You know what I mean? Like, you want it to stand out, but like not in a like, I can't think of a better way to say it right now, like cringy way. So just have somebody else read it and make sure that it's not tipping on that edge. So okay, so is it okay for certain aspects of your personal statement and meaningful experiences in the ERAS application to overlap? Or do you think you should try to talk about something else to avoid overlap as much as possible?
I think it really depends on what it is specifically. I mean, if it's something that really led to your experience and led to one of the reasons you went into PM&R, and it was a pretty extended experience, like you did a lot of adaptive sports and you did a lot of different things with adaptive sports and you have some of those experiences, I think that would be something that would be good to tie into your personal statement. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Just because when you're interviewing, they're more likely to talk to you about something that you really highlight multiple places. So if it is something that's really meaningful for you that you've had an extended experience with, I think that would be good. If it was something you did just once, I don't think that's something you probably need to repeat again in your personal statement.
Anybody else have any thoughts on that one? Okay. So the chat is getting to be a little bit active, but there was a question. We're going to transition to meaningful experiences and whatnot, but before I just want to call attention to the comment about, you know, should you put a little blurb at the end about why you're interested in a program? And I think there's a lot of good comments that are coming in, but I think to summarize, I think number one, make sure you're doing what that program wants. So like on their ERAS profile, look at that. Like on their whatever website they have, just make sure you check that to see if they want it or they don't want it. If it's not listed, I think you can do whatever you want. But I think make sure that if there is something out there that tells you to go one direction, that you have looked and know about it. And then the only other thing I was going to add as I was like trying to type was just be genuine. Like I don't think you need to do that for every single program you need, but if there's a genuine reason like that you don't think I can fully see on your application, like, hey, my best friend lives in Cincinnati, like, you know, or whatever, then I would definitely put that there because that's something that I think is really meaningful. But I think I don't know. I personally think it's become less and less critical as we've gotten signals and all these other, you know, geographic preferences that we're able to glean a little bit more from you all in terms of that. But I don't know if anybody else had any other comments other than what was going on in the chat.
I was just saying, you know, aside, obviously making sure it's the correct program. I agree with that. It's really important. But if you're like overly generic about it, it's evident that you're just plugging different program names into like these like sentences in your statement. And we have the ability to like search your whole application for certain words. So like if we're looking for like the name of our program in your application and we find that and then read this non-specific sentence in your statement, it's going to come off as Dr. Bolger mentioned, like disingenuous. And but if it's like in the context of, oh, I worked with this faculty member or one of your residents, you know, I'm really close with, and they can't stop talking about how great this experience has been, like those types of things, I think would definitely like, okay, this person has a connection and that makes sense. But if it's just like, I want the outstanding education that X program has to offer, well, then it's just sort of like, okay, you didn't really do your homework. And so then it looks a little less effortful.
And I'll just delete the comment I was typing because that was exactly it. Just make sure it's really something truly specific to that program. You know, there are a lot of unique characteristics, so speak to those because we can kind of tell when it's general and easy to broadly apply those to a bunch of different personal statements.
And then this might be obvious, but make sure if you are writing little statements at the end of it that you save the name of the program with a personal statement, because it will probably kill your application if you send the wrong one to the wrong program.
Yeah. So there's a question on here about dual applying for peds rehab and PM&R. I'll just touch on that related to the personal statement. You can send different personal statements to different programs. So I think we're going to have a specific peds rehab webinar coming up. Would invite you all to join. But in general, I would just say, make sure I know that you are interested in peds rehab. I can't tell you how many applications I get to our combined program that don't mention peds rehab anywhere. Who would have thought? So, but I'll kind of leave it at that for today. Is it okay to indicate to program coordinators or attendings during a ways that you are interested in their specific program? What are people's thoughts? I think that goes with kind of what we're talking about right now. Seeing lots of thumbs up and nods. Cool.
I would say yes, but don't expect like a full reciprocation back or something like that, if that makes sense.
I would also like to emphasize that, and I think this goes along with like the preference signal thing that we're about to talk about. If indicating that you want to go there, but not preference signaling, may not look great, especially with the increased number of preference signals that you're going to be getting this year. So I wouldn't necessarily use that conversation in lieu of a preference signal because, yeah, that'd be just a suggestion.
Okay. Let me find my next one I want to do. Let's kind of transition a little bit to meaningful experiences. So any advice that you guys have about choosing your 10 experiences? Like, what do you tell students? Like, how do they pick these 10 that are listed? Or residents, how did you pick the 10 that were listed? And I don't know, I think, no, some of you might not have actually gotten the whole 10 thing. You might have been still unlimited, but we're getting close to everybody having the 10.
I mean, in general, you want to obviously pick things that you can talk a lot about because anything on your application is going to be fair game. So you want to think about if you've spent enough time that experience, if they asked you about it, is it something you're excited about? Is it something that you could hold a whole conversation for? There's a lot of things I did in medical school I did not include in my application at all, just because I knew if somebody did ask a question about it, I couldn't like hold a whole conversation for it. So I think it has to be something that's pretty meaningful for you and something that you ideally spent a good amount of time doing. And then it contributed to your experiences, ideally to pursue the field of PM&R or had a meaningful experience that impacted your course in medical school.
And impactful and meaningful experiences don't have to necessarily relate to physiatry. We understand that applicants have had a lot of different experiences in their life and in their medical training that may influence the type of physician that you want to become when it comes to other skills related to maybe communication or public health or research. I mean, the list goes on. So just think about that. I mean, I think you're authentically just sitting there thinking why you want to do PM&R. You all have reasons why. That should help you to create your list of those meaningful things that led you to this career path.
I think things that tend to, I think are helpful for me are like leadership experiences in general. It doesn't have to be anything PM&R related or something a little more longitudinal. I think one of the questions that often gets asked is, can you use things from before medical school? I think so, but just be, you don't need everything on there on those 10 lists to be before medical school. I think that sometimes will raise a red flag, but if there was some place that you volunteered at, or, I had somebody who was like a leader in an organization that they started in undergrad and continued all through medical school, like that's really cool, even if it's not PM&R related. So I think those kind of things are definitely can take you just like a little bit higher if you have something like that.
I've heard of people, getting advice about batching things, and I think that can work in certain areas, so you wouldn't want to use all of your 10 most meaningful experiences on 10 individual research projects, that's probably not a good use of all of those. So can you batch that into my research experience or something like that, and then highlight a couple of those, list the rest of it in your ARIS application, under the publications and things. And so maybe some of those can be batched together. That might, kind of artificially buy you a few more, but just make sure they fit together and it's not just one massive, blurb. You kind of want to bullet it out or something like that, and be ready to talk about all of them on an interview.
That's probably a good lead into one of the other questions that was submitted. So what aspects would you recommend including when describing those meaningful experiences? Because you have that little like free text box. Do people have thoughts, or residents? How did you do that? Like, did you get any Any tidbits?
I mean, on mine, I kind of treated it like a kind of maybe a tiny bit of extension off of like a resume of kind of what my roles were, what I was doing, kind of like if I had like leadership roles on something, and like what like if it was a project, what it resulted in, those types of things. I don't. I mean, people read through a ton of different things, and they have a lot to read through, so I didn't add a lot of fluff to it. I kind of just got to the point of kind of what I was doing for that specific experience.
Yeah, I would agree. Like, elaborate on what you think is important that you did with that experience, but you don't have to go crazy. I think succinct is an amazing, amazing thing for residency applications. Okay, this is a somewhat specific question, but I think it's an interesting one. So it kind of is similar-ish, but for someone who went to a smaller undergrad school and did not take any gap years, how would you proceed with the meaningful experiences since they will not be as long-lasting, PM&R related, and due to the lack of opportunities? Can you give some examples of meaningful experiences that stood out to you, or what are some meaningful experiences that are overdone?
Yeah, I think like volunteerism and service like would be something, just seeing like consistency in that, even if it's not directly related to PM&R. As far as meaningful experiences that stuck out, I mean, I don't know. I like sports a lot, so when I see sports related stuff, especially if you like my favorite teams, so if any of you applicants out there guess my favorite teams, maybe it'll help you out. But you know, it's different program director to program director, so that it's going to be hard to tell you exactly. But I think like consistency and like dedication would be important things to see in your meaningful experience.
You know, I think kind of the purpose of those experiences is to show what you've done outside of school. We're all assuming that you've finished your undergraduate degree, you've gotten to medical school. Like I think that's you know a given. But what if all you did was study and you didn't do anything outside of that? It's going to be hard to probably find some meaningful experiences. So I think that's the purpose, is to talk about things that you did. So service, volunteerism, maybe you were an athlete in college, right? And you didn't have much room for anything else other than athletics in school. And so I would talk about that, you know. And that might be a time where something you go a little bit further back again, trying to find something, but again, it's got to be meaningful and kind of tied to your application. Um, so I think a smaller school with maybe not as many opportunities, it might be a little bit harder to dig. But I think if you think about all the things you did other than just, you know, studying and passing the classes, you'll find some stuff that is pertinent to your application.
Okay, as this is also a little bit more specific one, but as an international medical graduate, what experiences will make the PD or the person reviewing the application understand my passion towards PM&R? Whether it's, you know, meaningful experiences, or I guess we can flip back to personal statement as well. And I'll leave it at that because it's a two-part question. Any thoughts on IMGs or?
This is an especially complicated question at the moment, unfortunately, because I don't want to like deny the reality of this country at the moment. Like we got emails last week that we're not like able to honor visas for like moving forward, and we're not clear how that's going to look. So, you know, I don't want to discourage an IMG from applying and putting yourself out there. I just want you to know that this is a bit of a challenging time to even kind of just talk about that aspect of things. But in terms of experiences, I think for me at least, having some understanding of how the healthcare system works in the United States is really important, because as you'll learn, different countries operate and healthcare systems operate very differently. And that could be a really big transition to happen for anyone if they're coming and starting here. So some sort of connection or highlighting some sort of understanding of that.
And I'm sorry, I got caught up in the chat, so I missed the initial question from Dr. Bolger, but just kind of piggybacking off of the last statement, when we transition, I think, over into our signals portion, that's just another avenue, especially for an IMG applicant to really stand out. So we can talk a little bit more about that as well.
I can say it's almost like the opposite. The question was, how do you show your interest in the field? There's been a couple like IMG applicants where like the only thing they can find is like orthopedic research. So often I've been like, I've just asked them, I mean, are you applying to orthopedic surgery and PM&R is your backup or things like that? And it wasn't the case, but I think making that like clear that it's not a dual application as a second choice for you.
For those of you who might be following the chat, there's a lot of chatter right now about kind of I'll summarize it as the balance between, when did those meaningful experiences occur, depending on your pathway to medical school and to residency. So for people that are reading, I don't know if there was anything else that you felt like you wanted to elaborate on. I know there's been a lot of good answers in the chat, but I just wanted to give anybody an opinion to elaborate on that if there was something that you wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, I included stuff that I did before, like I worked before medical school, and it had a big impact on my choice to do like PM&R as a specialty. But what I did for work, I continued to do during medical school. So I kind of kept it all under like one header when I did my application. But I think if you like did something in undergrad and you completely stopped it, like you did adaptive sports and you completely stopped, I would say that's a little bit different than if you did adaptive sports and you kind of continued it through medical school. I think it's okay to include both, but I think it looks probably better if you did something in undergrad and you continued that onto the medical school, showing that you've kind of had a longitudinal experience with something. But I think either way, probably it's okay to include either, but it just looks better if it's more longitudinal.
Yeah, I think that's pretty well said. I just don't think you want to leave the person reviewing your application with this question of like, how does that tie into a PM&R application, right? So you really want everything to kind of point to PM&R, your personal statement, your experiences, all that stuff. And in case you don't get a chance to interview at that place, sort of like leaving money on the table, so to speak, so you don't want to leave anything kind of left unsaid saying, well, I'll talk more about it at the interview. And so you don't want to do that. So I think as long as you're saying, okay, I read through this, I had somebody else read through it, and this clearly points to rehabilitation, function, recovery, neuro, MSK, something like that, then I think you're probably okay. Yeah.
Or like other skills, communication, leadership, understanding, big systems or, those kinds of skills that you acquired in your prior life, career, whatever journey that have informed you and will make you better as a physiatrist in the future. I think that then it can come together, because I know there's plenty of people who've had like totally unrelated careers and then came into it and it still serves them, but just making that connection and making sure we understand you understand the connection.
Okay, I'm starting to see some chatter about program signaling, so that's, I think, a pretty good transition, because I know there's always a lot of questions about this. But I'm going to start with more of the geographic preferences question, because there was a lot of questions submitted around that. So thoughts on choosing no geographic preference, hurting or enhancing our chances at all places, or should you pick divisions? Especially if you don't have a preference.
Yeah, it's my understanding they can pick 3 regions, right? Is that right? I think so. I mean, I don't think it hurts to have no preference, but it can help you get hired outside of your region. So like I went to medical school in Oklahoma. I did residency in New York. We didn't have signaling. So like it was very hard for me to break in for any reason to go over there. So it can be helpful. I don't think it hurts to put no preference.
Yeah, exactly. So we've really looked at this data, and I know that it's highly stressful and confusing given signals and geographic preferences and how different they are. But geographic preference, one of those 3 regions that were mentioned, if that aligns with a program, you do statistically have a higher chance of interviewing there. However, if you choose no preference, you also have a higher chance of getting an interview there when compared to what we would consider a misaligned geographic preference. So when you're thinking about it, either having an alignment, meaning the same territory as the program, that is great. No preference, that's also great. The things that may potentially, I don't want to use the word hurt you, but give you less of a chance, is having a blank statement there, which means that it's a malaligned geographic preference. So I'm in Pennsylvania. If you chose 3 programs, or I'm sorry, if you chose 3 geographic preferences that were in different regions outside of mine, then it would show it as blank. Essentially telling me that you either skipped the question, which is possible but very rare, or that you chose something else. So that would give you the less chance, statistically speaking. I hope that makes sense, because I respect how confusing it is.
And I think I'll just add, kind of piggyback and add off of that, because there's a few of us on this call that I feel like have been in the weeds with this data for years at this point. But I think the one thing I'll just throw out there is that PM&R is going to larger signaling numbers this year. And so while we don't know exactly how that will impact PM&R, I think looking at some of the specialties who have gone to big signaling previously, I think it makes the geographic preferences less helpful, less meaningful, even, like people are not looking at them as much because you have more of an option to spread your signals across more programs. So I think the data in other specialties leads to that way. I don't have data for PM&R to say that that's how it's going to pan out, but there's quite a few specialties that's what it looks like. So and on that flip side, there are a few specialties this year that are piloting no geographic preferences, because I think there's definitely specialties out there that feel like they have not been as helpful, or for whatever reason, their specialty is not really using them the way they were intended. So I don't know. In the past, I've heard it described as a tiebreaker. Like, signaling definitely gives you a higher chance. Like if you send one of those program signals to a program, that's going to be much more meaningful than having an aligned geo preference without a signal. So.
And some of us are geographically lumped into an area that doesn't make sense. So like Maryland is southeast, and we're like dead in the middle of the East Coast. So like all of these people want to go to like Florida, Georgia, the Carolinas, and it doesn't make sense that they geographically signal us for that reason. So like I've generally kind of stopped paying attention to it, because there's so many people, like those are much bigger states too. So it doesn't really align with where we're located per se. So, but I definitely think this coming year preference signals are going to have a much bigger impact on getting an interview and or not getting an interview, I should probably say.
Okay. So anybody have thoughts on what factors should be taken into account when selecting your signals? So not geo preferences, but your signals that you are given. Or for residents, how did you select? I know it's going to be different because those of you who had signals, it was a much smaller number than these folks will have, but advice that you would think of giving and how you used your signals.
I guess in my year I had 5 signals, and pretty simple about it. I know it's like there's a lot of pressure to like think about like how we can maximize chances of getting interviews, but for me I had to just really reflect on like the 5 places I really wanted a chance at an interview, and just did my preferences or signaling based on that. So I just had to really reflect on those 5 programs, and then I matched the geographic preference signaling that way too.
And I did the same. I think all of my program signals were in the same regions. I did geographic preferences. And there are programs I wanted to know that, like, for sure that to let them know that I wanted to go there, that they were one of my top choices. I only had 4, keep in mind though, so I had to be a little bit more selective, but it was programs I knew I would have a good chance of going to, but I also wanted them to know that, like I said, I wanted to really go to their program. So at the end of the day, if I got an interview and everything, they would know it. So hopefully I would be able to match. And I did a couples matching too. So it also was based off of my wife as well too, where her top programs were. So we kind of had to work together on that.
And I don't know if any of the program directors feel differently. At least at my program, when it was a smaller number of signals, kind of the broad overview thought was like, oh, you don't have to necessarily signal us if you didn't audition with us, because that shows a lot of commitment to the program. But now with the higher number, I feel like maybe that more picking exactly like where you want to go and kind of aligning your signals with that more than like if you did an audition there or not. I don't know if you guys would agree with that statement with the higher number of signals now.
That's interesting you mentioned that. I think the first couple of years we struggled with that because I felt like we could give some students an extra signal by saying, hey, you rotated here, or you're a home student or something like that. Don't worry about signaling us. Well, I think as we developed kind of our best practices within the AAP and trying to guide students, we've kind of fallen on, signal the programs that you want to go to, including if that includes your home program. So, but I see the value in that. But I think with 20, it'll be a little bit different. So understand the numbers changed every year. So we're reinventing how this looks for us each year between 0, 3, 4, 5, 20, so it might be, 117 next year. We'll see what happens, but
And I think with the increase in signals, it's very possible that some programs may only look at signals. I don't think anybody really knows how that's going to pan out, including all of us program directors, because we have no idea how many applications we're going to get that have a signal associated with it. But I do think you just have to, kind of think about what's happened in the past when we had 3 and 5 signals, and just think statistically speaking, that's a very high possibility that may happen. So I think you really do need to spend some time thinking about where you want to go, and how you want to use those. I know there's a lot of different types of strategy, and that's okay. I mean, this is your future, this is your career. When you go to apply for a job in a few years, I think many of us can attest that we probably didn't apply to like 70 or 90 jobs after residency. Like you have to kind of start narrowing it down at some point. So use this as an opportunity to really reflect and think about how you want to use those signals.
I'd say like on our program, even this past year or two, and when we were reviewing people and stuff, a lot of times in the conversations would come up about if they signaled our program or not, because that kind of showed that people were interested in us. And I think some people would also move down if they didn't signal, just because we don't know if someone would be interested in during the conversations. And I know there was like conversations too about with this 20 signal, kind of what everyone's talking about is, should we even kind of look like if somebody didn't signal our program with 20 signals, do they really actually want to go to our program?
Yeah, and I'll just kind of throw out there, again, this will be the first year that we have a larger number of signals, so we don't have PM&R data, but again, the other specialties that have gone before us, so to speak, definitely shows kind of a much steeper drop off if you did not signal a program with the larger signals. So there is, in the other specialties, it is very, very unlikely that you would get an interview at a program you didn't signal with the larger numbers. Now, the caveat to that is larger numbers for one specialty don't equal the same as larger numbers for another specialty. Then there's like the two-tiered specialties. And so not, every specialty is a little bit different. So I don't know that we can completely extrapolate, what has happened elsewhere, but just to throw out, sort of what the data supports at this point. So. This is kind of piggybacking off of this. I don't know if we have any other specific comments, but I've heard that for some applicants, it may not be worth applying to more than 20 programs. Anybody feel like they could want to comment on that, or I mean,
I want to reemphasize what Dr. Romanoski said. We don't know yet. This is our first year at this and we're figuring it out as we go. I apologize to all of you who are in this guinea pig stage along with us. I think until we get the applications and we see what we're dealing with, all of us are just going to do the best we can. And I think that we'll hopefully be able to give more clarity on that in the future. So my apologies to all of you as we work through this. We're trying to make it better.
Yeah, I don't know if there's not a lot of guidance, but I would say take a lot of self-reflection at your own application. Be critical and try to reflect where are your signals going to hold the most value for you to send them. Maybe that'll help a little bit.
Yeah, I think individualized approach is probably the best way to go about it. I think, and I think that goes with where to put those 20 signals, finding someone that might be able to look at your application and critically review it and say okay, I think there's going to, to be honest, I think there's going to be some gaps. I think, based on all the applications we've reviewed, these are the things that I think either you're missing or, you may not stand out or, whatever it is, but that may change your philosophy for where you signal. Because I think, what the data has shown other specialties is with 20 signals, the really nice part about it is that it spreads the signals over more programs. So when we only have a small number of signals, there's a small chunk of programs that get a lot of signals, and there's on the other tail end a small chunk of programs that may only get one or two signals. And so those two programs are going to have very different approaches to reviewing applications and whatnot. And so with 20 signals, the thought and what has happened sort of in other specialties is that just gets spread out. Yes, there's still going to be those programs that get a ton of signals, and that's going to be a much different meaning than, on that other end of the spectrum. But hopefully it gives a little bit more spread. And so you don't have to worry as much, as the people with 4 to 5 signals that were like, I mean, how do I know what my top 4 programs are? Like, what's the difference between my 4th program and my 5th program? Like, because there's probably not. Like, you can't just have 4 favorite I just, hopefully it'll give you a little more flexibility, and not have to worry so much. I'm trying to look at the chat here. I think a lot of these. There's a question about standardized letters of evaluation. Since that's not the topic of this, I'm going to reference you. Our last webinar, we talked all about SLOs, and it is posted as far as Amy. I'm pretty sure it's up and posted, and you can review it. Yes, I would encourage you to go to that. And the chat box from that will be up very soon because I just sent Amy that today. So, yeah. This is a good question for signaling. So the combined PEDS rehab programs do actually not participate in signaling. So this is only PM&R signals that are coming out of that bucket of 20. Fortunately or unfortunately, with ERAS the way it is set up right now, you don't, it's dependent on the specialty. So if you dual applied for ortho and PM&R, you get the ortho number of signals and you get the PM&R number of signals, and they don't overlap at all. They don't know what you're doing in those 2 buckets, but you don't double dip. So so there are no signals for PEDS rehab programs because there's only 4 of us. So it would maybe be kind of pointless to give you a signal. So. Cool. We've got a couple minutes left. Does anybody else? That's all the pre-submitted and like major questions that I had on my list. Are there any other questions out there that people potentially wanted to unmute and ask, or you can put in the chat, whatever you guys are all most comfortable with? That's a good one. Any general advice for applying to away rotations for this upcoming year? Since we have some spare time, I think it's fine if people had some comments or thoughts.
If you mean like starting this summer, I would say the general advice is it's pretty late. Like I think a lot of applications, some programs have already hit their deadlines past. But if you're thinking about for the following kind of spring, summer, fall, the earlier the better, because a lot of us, my program included, it's kind of first come, first serve. Or there's make sure you check the websites if there's a deadline, because you want to make sure you have that in as early as possible.
Yeah, I would say if there's a place you want to go, you didn't get a rotation at, it doesn't hurt in like October, November to see if someone dropped out, send an email.
Angie, I see your hand up.
Hi, thank you. I was just, since we were talking about the away rotations, how much weight do you guys see that as a adding to their likelihood of getting an interview? Because if you look at the NRMP charting outcomes, it gives you these really large interview numbers, and it's just not possible to do that many aways. So how much weight do you guys find that is really impactful, or is it not?
Yeah, I mean this is going to be program specific again. I mean, I've worked at places where we had 6 students at a time versus others where you only have 2 the whole time. So, if you have 6 for 6 months, that you probably can't interview everyone that way. But the weight actually comes in your performance. So it's a door opening, but it's easy for you to close that door or you to bust through. So be prepared and be professional, be punctual, be hardworking. All those things make up for low scores, poor letters, all these other things if people have good firsthand experience with you.
I think it probably pays more of a bigger impact on you getting into a program versus interview. I think we interview like a good amount of people. that rotate through us, but their performance during their rotation really impacts whether or not we like them enough to feel like they were a good fit to accept them as like a resident. Like if their maybe some scores weren't as good, but they had a really, really good performance with us, that would boost them up in our matching. So I think it really plays a bigger impact on like matching with a program at the end of the day if you did really, really good.
Yeah, and I would agree with what Dr. Choudry said. You know, it's probably going to be program specific where the number of students we get is we sort of have an unwritten rule, you know, that we interview anybody who comes and rotates with us. We have that capacity within our interview season, you know, so but also like was said, you know, it's easy to close the door. And I think Drew said it well too, you know, like if you come and you do a really good job and you have a lot of the characteristics that that individual program is looking for, that I think that can dramatically increase your match you know, your prospect of matching if that's one of your top programs, obviously. So I think just like a lot of things that we've talked about tonight, you really got to be thinking about what matters most to you, right? Where do I want to go a ways? Where do I want to send my signals? How do I, you know, address my little personal statement, you know, additional paragraph addendum thingy? All those things are really just they're really specific to you, and it is hard to navigate kind of all the variables that happen in this process, but it still should just come down, in my opinion, to you and where do you want to go? Where do you want to train? What program fits you best, whether it's geography or program specifics or this part of a program or couples match, whatever it is. I think it really, you have to play the game, so to speak, but I think it really is your match, and the best that you can do to make it your match, I think the better off you'll be.
So there's some great last questions. So I'm gonna wrap up with some resident perspective. So there's a couple questions that just got added if you guys saw it. So feel free to address either one of these, but residents who are joining us today, what's one thing you wish you would have done differently during your application process? Or were there general buckets of priorities that you focused on in terms of signaling your programs? Obviously, that's going to be maybe a little different than this group, given the change in numbers, but any comments from you all?
One thing I did towards the end that I wish I'd done in the beginning was make a list of all the things that are important to me, however big or small. Like one of the things was having an on-campus cafeteria, because I did an audition one place that didn't have a cafeteria on campus, and I forgot my lunch one day, and it was just so much more difficult. So I think making a list of all the things that are even remotely worthwhile to you to note, because it's really hard. Like you'll interview all these programs and you meet with people for 20 minutes and you don't know a real feel of the program. So having that list of things just to ask about and kind of, it might not make or break your decision. You might just get a feel during the interview. But it's good just to have that information to go back to if you're like really kind of deciding, like picking hairs between two different programs and where to list things. So I think that's important just to kind of get a list of what's important to you and try to ask that to everybody.
Yeah, and I agree with that completely. I think one thing I didn't do that I wish I would have done is like make a list of the things that were important and then really look more in depth at each program. I think there were some programs I interviewed at and I was like halfway through my interview, I was like, man, I don't, this program is not a good fit for me. And I could have saved a lot of time by really doing some more reading and learning more about the program than I did. I ended up being at a program that's luckily a really, really good fit for me, but I think I could have prepared myself a little bit better by looking a little bit more in depth into some of the programs beforehand. It's really hard to find that information, unfortunately, a lot of them, but I wish I'd have reached out to more people at some of the programs to learn a little bit more rather than finding out some of the information more so on interview day.
Yeah, I agree with Alyssa and Drew. Making a list of what's important to me was something I wish I did a better job at, which is it can be overwhelming throughout the application process, and it's good to have that list to look back on.
Awesome. We are 1 minute shy of 9 o'clock. So I know I'll kind of do my wrap ups. Amy, if you want to throw up our QR code, that would be awesome. So we are trying as a group that runs this Road to Residency webinar, trying to do a little better at learning who's in our audience. as well as there's some opportunities to connect with other medical students if you are not involved with AAP. So some dashboards and different things. So these are 2 QR codes. We would love for you to complete a very, very short evaluation on who you are and if this was helpful, if there were things we should have done differently. That would be amazing, because this has been a really awesome series that we've been doing for the last several years, and we want to continue to reflect and make it better. And then there's also a QR code for linking you up with Physiatry Connect and the different med student, groups that the AAP has. So, and then last but certainly not least, well, 2 things. One, I know this is not the standardized letter of evaluation webinar, but the website for the SLO, Amy put the link, I believe I saw in the chat somewhere embedded in there. It is live now. So if you've had a lot of questions, it is live, and you are able to go in there and look at all the FAQs and the different instructions and different resources that we have posted on there. And then I would just say, if you're interested, follow the AAP on social media, because we're going to do a big media blast with some QR codes to link to resources over the next several weeks as well. So, but my last thing I will do is just thank you to all of my panelists today. I know this is taking time out of your days, so I greatly appreciate you guys willing to join us and provide some advice. So, but I'll wrap it up there. Hope to see you guys at the next Road to Residency webinar. Reach out if you need anything.